Good afternoon to you. Thank you for being here with us on From the South. Our top story takes us to Venezuela and to President Nicolas Maduro, who has extended the state of exception to 10 more municipalities along the border with Colombia. The measure is part of the extensive operation undertaken by Venezuela to tackle Colombian paramilitary cross-border crimes. Those crimes include smuggling of subsidized Venezuelan goods, including gasoline, into Colombia. The new measure was implemented at border crossings in the states of Zulia and Apure. Maduro expressed hope that a meeting with the Colombian president, Juan Manuel Santos, will take place.
Only with a meeting with you, President, can the situation at the border be resolved with the mediation of CELAC and UNASUR. Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez told me that there will probably be a presidential meeting in Quito on Monday. I am ready, and hopefully the meeting will take place. But I have a sensation that President Santos doesn't want to meet, maybe due to the reason external to Colombia.
In the last few hours, however, the Colombian president seems to have shifted his position. He said the conditions he had demanded were on the way to being resolved, and that he was now prepared to agree to a meeting with President Maduro.
I repeat, I am ready to meet President Maduro so we can take decisions and find concrete ways to make the border open and free of crime. We are not going to meet just for the photo, to shake hands and let things go on in the same way. The humanitarian conditions are being met, and I again thank Ecuador and Uruguay for their support.
Y que todo siga igual. Las condiciones mínimas humanitarias se han venido cumpliendo. Y reitero mis agradecimientos a Ecuador, a Uruguay, por sus buenos oficios.
Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa also expressed his concern on Tuesday and said that his country has been working with Uruguay on a diplomatic initiative to bring together the presidents of Colombia and Venezuela.
The lack of communication creates more lack of communication, more misunderstanding, alleged violations of airspace, and so on. Talking is the way to clear things up. For instance, Venezuela says they have never separated families, right? But maybe in some operation, one child got left on the other side of the border, and no one would be opposed to him rejoining his family. So we're working to push this direct meeting between Juan Manuel Santos and Nicolás Maduro, while completely respecting the sovereignty of each country. We know it's a bilateral issue, but it also affects our region. And also, it's partly our responsibility as a current president of CELAC. So we are working with Uruguay and President Tabaré Vázquez, who has the presidency of UNASUR, and his foreign minister was at the meeting on Saturday.
Live now to Bogota and our correspondent Natalia Margarita. Natalia, are you there with us?
Yeah.
Great. Natalia, this morning President Santos said his conditions were being met and that he is now ready to meet President Maduro, possibly next Monday. What are these conditions, and does this signify a change of position by the Colombian government?
Yeah, Regan. Well, in fact, he said that the minimum humanitarian are being met, and the minimum humanitarian conditions refer to a humanitarian corridor so that both children and workers can move from one side of the border to the other to develop their activities. And that's what Santos referred to by saying that these conditions are being met. Now, in terms of the possibility of the meeting with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, President Santos said that he's willing to do so, that he ratified the necessity of this meeting between both presidents, meaning he and President Nicolas Maduro, and he also they will continue managing this border crisis under the principles of determination, diplomacy, and dialogue, insisting one more time the importance of dialogue with them.
Now, this has been such a contentious issue of the past weeks, months even. What are the expectations there in Colombia for a possible meeting between the two presidents?
Well, following after two meetings that were held between both foreign affairs ministers, meaning Delcy Rodriguez and María Ángela Holguín, many social and political analysts here have been insisting that now it is time enough for both presidents to meet. On the other side, President Maduro-Santos today in his statement said that he's willing to meet with President Nicolas Maduro, but that he does not want to hold a meeting just for the sake of having the picture of both of them shaking hands. That he is willing to meet, but under a concrete agenda that could let both heads of state to concrete solutions so that we can have, again, a border open.
Natalia, we know that countries in the region, such as Ecuador and Uruguay, as well as regional bodies, CELAC and UNASUR, have been helping to create an environment for discussion between Venezuela and Colombia. Do you think this at all has been important in the region?
In fact, President Juan Manuel Santos this morning acknowledged the significant role that both Ecuador and Uruguay have been playing to generate these minimum conditions for a dialogue between Nicolas Maduro and himself, Juan Manuel Santos. He acknowledged that important role. He publicly thanked both countries, Ecuador and Uruguay, and he also confirmed that this same morning he spoke directly with Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa, and he asked him to continue to strengthen efforts so that this border will be solved. He didn't make any reference to UNASUR and CELAC, but indeed he explicitly referred to the important roles of both Ecuador and Uruguay.
Natalia, thanks as usual for those updates. It's great to have you on the ground. We will chat with you another time. Thanks again.
Okay, back to you again.
Moving on now, Mexico's Foreign Minister Claudia Ruiz Massieu has visited the Mexican tourists who were injured in an airstrike by the Egyptian security forces that killed 8 Mexican nationals. Claudia Ruiz Massieu has also requested that an investigation be launched into the accident. The foreign minister, who said this was an unprecedented incident, has met her Egyptian counterpart Sameh Shoukry, who penned an open letter to the Mexican people, expressing his condolences and sympathies, yet offering no clear apology. Massieu will also later meet with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to discuss the way forward.
We are also here to emphasize Mexico's demand for an exhaustive, prompt and deep investigation, to clarify the facts and to determine responsibilities in accordance with Egyptian law, but also in accordance with international law.
And coinciding with the report starting this Wednesday, Washington will be hosting days of action against the U.S.-imposed blockade on Cuba. Now, the protest will continue until Friday and will include 44 visits to the U.S. Congress to demand that lawmakers put an end to the blockade. They will also be supporting events in other cities in the U.S., as well as in other countries such as Belgium, Canada, Russia, Sweden, and Switzerland. A massive marijuana bust took place on Tuesday in Bolivia. It's yet another victory for the country's war on drugs. More with our new correspondent, Dimitri O'Donnell in La Paz.
This drug has its origin in Paraguayan territory, and Bolivia was being used, as in other occasions, as a transit area to bring this drug to other markets in neighboring countries.
It's been a busy few months for Bolivia's drug authorities. Earlier this month, border raids by the Special Forces to fight drug trafficking seized 1.5 tons of marijuana in the southeast. In August, a further 2.5 tons were captured from Paraguay. Those shipments were being sent to Chile and Argentina. Despite the crackdown, the US is still not satisfied. President Barack Obama says Bolivia, Myanmar and Venezuela have all demonstrably failed to curb drug trafficking. But Bolivia's President Evo Morales said the problem lies with US policy and highlights a recent UN report that confirmed Bolivia had reduced the amount of land planted with coca for the 4th year in a row.
I want to categorically reject this statement from the U.S. State Department about the fight against drug trafficking. Bolivia is a model for the world, and our record shows this. They should talk about those countries that have bigger drug problems and where there's a growing U.S. presence.
President Evo Morales continues to insist his strategy of allowing limited coca farming is working. The amount of land given to cultivating the cocoa plant fell by 11% last year, and because of this, the President says there will be no change to Bolivia's drugs policy. Dimitri O'Donnell, Telesur, La Paz.
Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez delivered today the country's annual report on the blockade imposed by the U.S. over 50 years ago. He also announced that President Raul Castro will attend the UN debate about the blockade on September 26th in New York. Here now we have Jorge Espinal, who is now on the phone for us. Jorge, are you there?
Yes, Regan, I am.
It's always great touching base with you. Now, the lifting of the blockade has been one of the main issues on the table after the re-establishment of diplomatic ties between Cuba and the U.S. Is there any progress in relation to this at all?
Well, today they are starting 3 days of action to end the U.S. blockade precisely here in Washington. We're talking members of about 60 organizations are coming from Canada, the U.S., and Puerto Rico, and they're planning to create, they have already set up 44 appointments within the Congress in order to meet with members of the Congress. They're going to meet with 37 members of congressmen and 7 senators. There are also this type of day of, if you want, activities, action to stop or to end the blockade is taking place, is having also a repercussion in other parts of the world. We're talking here, we're saying Brazil, Belgium, Canada, Russia, Switzerland, Sweden. So they're trying to create a very clear message that the blockade or the embargo, that's as they call it here in the US, has to stop. And also they're going to be asking for the US to withdraw from the Guantanamo base in Cuba and also to lift the limitations of traveling between the two countries, Regan.
Now, this blockade has obviously affected the government's ability to govern and to help its people, but it mostly affects the Cuban people. The blockade, the 50-year-old blockade, it's caused a lot of damage in the country worth some $800 billion, according to today's report. How can the U.S. government justify this, Jorge?
Well, if the Congress, because it's the Congress, the member of the government that has the authority to lift the embargo or the blockade, if they will do their homework, wouldn't be that easy. What I'm trying to talk is out of the polls, 2 out of 3 Americans are in favor of the lifting of the embargo, and 2 out of 3 Americans are in favor of the normalization of the relations with Cuba. The fact is, the threat, the hurdle, is that there are many, many observers and experts that they identify that most of the congressmen are not necessarily at the service of the people of the U.S., meaning those 2 out of 3 that they want, if not of the large corporations or the lobbyists. So therefore, the big question mark is until which point or until when they are not going to hear the claim of the majority of the population and therefore keep the status quo, or until which point basically it's going to be so strong that message of the majority of the Americans that the page of the Cold War that was including precisely the blockade to Cuba is finished, and they have to turn the page. They have to follow what the American people say, and they have to establish commercial relations with Cuba, normalization of relations, normalization of the traveling, and therefore reestablish the relations that they should have had.
I agree with you there. We have to listen to the Cuban people. Now, there's a third side to this, Jorge. There are companies that have been affected as well, third parties, so to speak, in other countries. Have they at all tried to put any pressure at all on the U.S. government to lift the blockade?
Well, they see, if we're talking about business now, they see, forget about the political aspect. Those companies, those countries, those corporations, they see the potential of 11 million Cubans, 11 million new customers, people who could be able to buy. So they most definitely are very much interested to establish commercial relations, trade relations, and to be the first to land in Cuba in order to benefit from that opportunity. So therefore, even some of the members of the Congress that are really very much, if you want, sponsored by large corporations are pushing in that sense to reestablish their relations with Cuba, the commercial, the trade with Cuba, so lift the blockade in order to quote unquote make money with the new 11 million consumers or customers that could represent the Cubans.
Now, Jorge, a lot of intellectuals and authors around the world have criticized and written about the US's stance towards Cuba, its crippling effects on Cuba, and like people like Noam Chomsky, who's called the US a rogue state, a failed state, in their obsession with Cuba, hoping to cripple it, because the perspective is that a government such as Cuba, which is not looking to the US for any sort of assistance whatsoever, and is not under the control of the US, is posing some sort of a threat in the region and may serve as an example for other countries around the world to follow suit. Now, the Cuban foreign minister has submitted a report to the international community, to the UN rather, where he's going to address the lifting of the blockade. Do you really think that this is going to change things?
Well, I love some of the words of Noam Chomsky when they say, for example, making the diagnostic of the quote unquote the U.S. democracy, saying in the U.S. there are not two political parties like Republicans, Democrats. It's only one political party, the business party, and yes. Therefore the thing is, every country of the world that they challenge because they want to push and strengthen their sovereignty, like in the case of Cuba, and they challenge the U.S. because they stop to be a market for them. Basically, that's what the U.S. is trying to get all over the world, markets. If someone, in order to defend their interests and defend their sovereignty, become an hurdle, immediately becomes in the blacklist, in the list that, for example, include measures like the blockade, and therefore the uphill battle that Cuba and any country of the world that could dare to impose their sovereignty against the U.S., they have to face that sort of sanctions and also the media bashing, that because the mass media in the U.S. is, according to many observers, at the service, is a branch, is an arm of big corporations. Remember that 90% of the mass media in the U.S. is in the hands of 6 corporations. Their information reaches about 300 million Americans every night. So whatever they decide for the people of the U.S. to think or to hear, it's going to include the bashing of countries like Cuba, who decided to strengthen and reinforce their sovereignty and stand against that countries like they perceive that the U.S. is not respecting their interests, and they want to impose their terms of ruling that relationship. So if you want, the foundations of this long conflict is big corporations trying to sell all over the world, and whatever countries they stop them to do so, they become the boogeyman.
Well, we certainly hope that these proposals by the Cuban foreign minister will make a dent and somehow represent the voices of the Cuban people as well as the international community who want the blockade lifted. Jorge, it's always great getting your perspective. And of course, we always appreciate your great reports. Hopefully we can touch base with you another time.
Thank you very much, Regan.
Thanks, Jorge. Moving on now, every 15th and 16th of September, Mexico celebrates its Independence Day, while this year marks 205 years since the country broke from Spanish colonial rule. Many in the streets wonder if there's anything to celebrate, pointing to staggering tolls of violence from the country's so-called drug war. a fragile economy and exposed political corruption. Clayton Khan is in Mexico right now with more.
The streets of downtown Mexico City display a stiff presence of more than 3,500 police to guarantee the official festivities of the country's Independence Day. What is typically a jubilant holiday seems to be anything but celebratory for many.
Do you know what the independence was? What do we have to celebrate or commemorate if we have the country destroyed, pawned off, with governments that continue to be more and more submissive?
All of the disappeared, the dead, Ayotzinapa, Iguala, the devaluation of the peso compared to the dollar.
Instead of the call of "Long live Mexico," many call for the resignation of President Enrique Peña Nieto, who under his watch has seen an escalation of the country's drug war-related violence, corruption scandals, human rights abuses by security forces, and an underperforming economy. Yet some say a spirit of struggle needs to be adopted.
These are days to continue to struggle for independence. November 20th is to continue fighting for our revolution. The struggle has not ended. Whoever stops struggling stops existing.
This sentiment of struggle can be heard by various civil organizations across the country who are holding what they say is the alternative Independence Day. They say aside from the deep troubles in the country, there is much to defend and celebrate.
Our country is rich in everything, in culture and in natural resources. And so we seek to defend this and be able to defend the fact that these resources belong to the Mexican people, to the people that are here and that work every day.
These same activists affirm that within that cultural richness, there are lessons to be learned about democratic practices that don't come from the official discourse.
We don't know anything else aside from what the government presents us as democracy. But if we turn and look around to see original people, we realize that it's not the only option. We have to turn and look. We need to learn from them because they have so much to teach us.
Yet while there is much optimism among this group of activists and citizens, the shadow of atrocities like Ayotzinapa continue to haunt the country and represent a stark reminder that much needs to be done before the population can regain confidence in its institutions. Clayton Khan, Telesur, Mexico City.
The Nigerian government is in talks with the Boko Haram group, finding what the negotiations are about when we return. The refugee crisis continues unabated, and many EU countries are trying to cope with a huge backlog of unregistered refugees. As a result, Austria has now taken Germany's lead and introduced stricter border controls there. Earlier this morning, the country implemented 3 new border stations after approximately 8,000 refugees entered the country on Tuesday.
We had huge numbers of refugees coming to Austria, and we want to control this situation with border controls. On the other hand, we want to fight this organized crime of people smuggling.
And since the Hungarian government officially closed the country's border with Serbia on Tuesday, many refugees have been left stranded there. As a result, the refugees staged a protest at the Hungarian security fence near the Serbian border town of Orgos. They demanded that authorities open the door as they chanted, "Germany, help us." And it seems that European border closures and controls have not deterred refugees. Earlier today, refugees from 10 boats made the hazardous crossing from Turkey and landed on the Greek island of Lesbos. The latest arrivals said they were determined to travel to Germany and other EU countries despite the new obstacles in their way. Now some bad news in Palestine. Mohammed Alan, the Palestinian prisoner who was released by Israeli authorities after an over 2-month hunger strike, has been arrested again. Noor Harazin has got more on this latest development. She filed this report.
We just got the news that the Israeli forces re-arrested Mohammed Alan. If we're speaking about who is Mohammed Alan, he is a Palestinian prisoner, ex-prisoner who started a hunger strike that lasted for 66 days. He stopped the strike around 2 weeks ago when the Israeli prison services promised to release him after he gets out of the hospital. However, he got out of the hospital today and the police re-arrested him. This news came as a shock to the Palestinian people, especially that all of the Palestinian people here on the ground in Gaza, in the West Bank and the Palestinian territories were planning to start celebrations for the freeing of Mohammed Allan.
A recent report on the large-scale attacks by the Boko Haram in Cameroon is denouncing the heavy-handed approach of security forces, as well as the inhumane prison conditions that have led to dozens more deaths. The report adds that Boko Haram is a very significant threat to Cameroon and other countries in the region, and that a continued scale-up of the security presence in that region is expected. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the country's president, Muhammadu Buhari, revealed that authorities were talking to Boko Haram prisoners in their custody and could offer them amnesty.
The few we are holding, we are trying to see whether we can negotiate with them for the release of Chibok gas. But we are being very careful about that. Unless we are convinced that we can get the girls reasonably healthy condition, we are not going to easily release the leadership we are holding yet.
Pope Francis had a private audience with some 20 European Union environment ministers, urging them to quickly intensify their work to combat poverty and environmental decline. The pontiff added that protecting the planet was a moral and ethical imperative for believers and non-believers alike. EU environment ministers will meet again on September 18th in Brussels to iron out their joint position ahead of the COP21 Paris Climate Conference to be held in France this coming December. Now, we previously reported on this record-breaking attempt just under 2 weeks ago. The Chinese skipper Guo Chuan and his crew of 4 sailors set off to create history for the first non-stop sail through the Northeast Passage in the Arctic Ocean. And they did it. The team consisted of crew members from Russia, France, and Germany. They crossed the finish line at the Bering Strait 1 day earlier than the 14 days they hoped the escapade would take. They faced freezing temperatures, strong winds, and even icebergs. However, their journey represents the first time a racing sailboat has completed this route successfully. Also in extraordinary news, Australian tightrope walker Kane Peterson crossed between 2 peaks of the Eureka Tower, almost 1,000 feet above Melbourne's skyline. And guess what? He developed a leg cramp halfway into the walk. Now, Walker was forced to lay down on the tightrope until the cramp eased up. He then managed to push through to complete the 69 feet he had left to complete this feat.
Dream for a while, Walker, to have this.
That is insane. And finally this afternoon, Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei has not always gotten along with the authorities in his country, as his political stance has not always been in line with his government's. However, his perspective is being honored by the Royal Academy of Arts in London. His artwork, which is very political in nature, is highly anticipated by British art lovers. According to the Royal Academy, this is the largest British retrospective of Ai's work, and many are looking forward to experience his poet sensitivity. For more on these and other stories, please visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. Please join us for our major newscast this evening. We'll see you then.